Again, welcome everyone. I'm excited to have everyone join me today. I love talking about artificial intelligence and technology just in general, and I'm excited to share my thoughts on what an AI-assisted technology would look like for safety specifically. The topic of an AI assistant is becoming mainstream, and not just safety, but for plethora of applications itself. Its application to safety is going to make the job of any safety professional much more profound. Imagine having a resource that just sits there and works 24/7 to answer you anytime you need to know something. It gets so good that it predicts your requests and start to automatically send them the reports or whatever requests you're looking for before you even request them. It learns what you're looking for even before you need it. You'll eventually have every single piece of information that you're looking for before you even request it, which makes you relatively superpower in respect to safety itself. Imagine not knowing something. Before we jump into the presentation itself, I'm just going to start with some housekeeping. Everyone's mic is muted. Feel free to drop any questions into the chat box, and we'll circle back with you offline to get them answered if we run out of time here. But for now, I'm going to start off just kind of letting you know who I am and how I got into safety. Normally here, I jump into a story about my dad and how I've been personally impacted by what a poor safety culture can look like at a young age. My dad's grown up through my entire life with a bad back because of a herniated disc that happened due to poor safety culture. But I really want to dive into why I feel like preventative measures are so important and why I chose this career in safety, compounding my story of my personal family member. And it's because safety culture is the ultimate preventative measure to incidents occurring. And preventative measures can be difficult to justify if we don't have a control case, or if there's some metric in which we measure the potential success of a preventative layer of protection. For example, with COVID being so prevalent in the news, in the early days, our best course of action was to self-isolate to flatten the curve in an effort to prevent the hospitals from being overwhelmed with sick people. And that measure worked. We collectively flattened the curve, but unfortunately, when a preventative measure works, people tend to have the memory of a goldfish, and they start asking, well, why are we doing this if the rates never hit what we were projecting them to do? And that's because the measure actually was effective. And but it's difficult to connect the dots because the feedback loop is non-existent. The exact same thing can be said for safety. The reason for reduced incidents is because we're performing safety well, and we need to remember that. And just because incidents aren't happening, we can't become complacent in terms of performing safety. Through my career of functional safety, I've extensively promoted the use of preventative measures to reduce risk rather than traditional mitigation tactics. It's always easier and cheaper to prevent an incident than it is to mitigate the consequences, as one of these consequences can last a lifetime if you consider it from the terms of a single human being. Moving forward, it brings us to safety tech itself, and the whole point of safety tech's existence is to exist to the purpose of supporting workplace safety by simplifying these processes that exist that aren't super intuitive. Engaging positive safety culture and reducing the carbon footprint in the long run. Having worked in the field, I've seen how safety can be viewed by plenty of workers. Some feel that safety is not really for them. It's for the company or the government, or they just need to do safety as more of a liability waiver as opposed to an exercise in protecting themselves and their colleagues. And so one thing that I'm trying to do with safety tech, and that we're trying to do as a team, is to flip that stigma on its head and allow people to recognize that safety is really for them. It's so that they can get home at the end of the day in the same condition or better than when they were arriving. So with that said, let's get into the agenda. So we're going to dive into what AI happens to be, in the next 30 minutes or so, and we'll discuss how safety is applied today. We'll collect the data, but how do we enhance it to make it useful? So we'll get into enhancing analytics, and how can AI be applied once we have those analytics to make safety a little bit better, and then discuss the necessary steps that are going to be involved when we prepare for an AI assistant, so that when the technology becomes available, we're not scrambling to try to close the chasm that exists between where we are and where we need to be. And then we'll do a quick wrap up and Q&A if there's any questions in the chat box and we have time. I'll make sure that we answer those live on the webinar. And if not, reach out afterwards and give you a chat. So artificial intelligence. Today, we see artificial intelligence technology, assisting many professionals on a day-to-day basis. I can relate it to the internet services trends that happened in 2010. Companies like Netflix and Spotify and Uber, they have functionally replaced the need for physical movie rentals, purchasing music, and hailing a taxi cab. And we can see how AI can make dramatic impacts on specialized or niche tasks. And so that's the correlation that I'm seeing in the trends. And it's excellent news, don't get me wrong. It won't be long before we begin to see more of this AI assistant technology roll out. We're already beginning to see strides made in training AI to perform repeatable tasks, such as contract review and analysis or due diligence in its use in scheduling. So that's both in legal and in the office environment. We're seeing the early trend form where this technology is going to take hold really fast and much quicker than the disruption that occurred with the internet services. So it's not going to take a decade to become normalized. It's going to be much faster. Perhaps a more suitable description, though, for AI is it's actually cognitive computing, and it means just training computers how to learn, reason, communicate, and make decisions all on their own. Cognitive engines are trained versus programmed, allowing them to learn how to complete tasks traditionally completed by people. And the focus is pattern recognition in data sets, testing the data and finding the results. Essentially a colleague, an actual person who can sift through the deck and tell you what they found. And this is important because according to IBM, humans generate 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day. And in case you're not up to date on what a quint is, that's 2.5 million billion bytes of data. And any human's ability to review and comprehend that level of data without help is absolutely impossible. So AI uses 3 technologies that all work together to communicate findings that we need, and to communicate the findings to us. We need natural language processing and understanding algorithm. So that's how we interact with it. This allows us to make requests to the AI and communicate back to us. Machine learning is the neural network behind the pattern recognition. So this is the part of the system that scans data to locate patterns. AI also needs some sort of visual component to it, be it a CCTV or OCR technology, like the optical character recognition technology, to scan human input. And all 3 of those systems put together are what make up an AI assistant. Now, moving on to the application of safety. For the realm of health and safety specifically, predictive analytics is really nothing new. It may not have been called analytics, but health and safety professionals have been leveraging many tools to predict where an incident may occur and prevent those incidents from ever happening. I've seen anything from giant spreadsheets with interconnected cells all feeding a chart to highlight anomalies for highly sophisticated access databases that everything gets transcribed into in an effort to uncover discrepancies. With that being said, there's the other side of the spectrum where safety professionals are so paralyzed by the sheer amount of work that goes into an analytics project that the project never really gets off the starting blocks. And staring at a room full of file cabinets with historical safety records can be daunting. The cost to transcribe those forms into a digital system can be so high that when requesting budget from finance that's a relatively non-starter. The upfront costs can escalate well beyond any project budget before any tangible insight can be gathered. So dirty data is what I'd like to call that. And it's such a problem that over the past 30 years, innovation hasn't even touched this sector in any meaningful way. Analyzing industry trends for workplace incidents, specifically fatalities, we see that there's a pretty flat line across the board. And in fact, organizations are spending more than ever to mitigate the consequence of incidents. And so it equates to about $55 billion per year. According to Miller Thompson, in mitigating incidents. And that's the cost of insurance claims, the cost of retraining, the cost of dealing with the incident itself. Resources for safety professionals are also few and far between. ID departments have to serve multiple stakeholders between projects and operations. And I've never seen a computer or data science professional in a safety department to date. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist, I just haven't seen it. This ultimately leaves an analytics project just out of reach for most safety professionals. And beyond that, selling an analytics project to executives can become even more difficult. The cases that are made are typically pretty weak, and the CFOs or finance execs will moan at the cost of these investments for these projects. And this is due to the preventative nature of the business case. Imagine eliminating all incidents. The impact of the bottom line would be huge, let alone the increase to productivity and the overall impact of the profit margin. But the business case is clear, and yet the upfront costs are still too high to get anyone on board. So before we dive in directly into the AI aspect of this piece, I'd like to run a quick poll. What I'm wanting to understand is if anyone's ever attempted to launch an analytics project, and for the purposes of analytics, I want to say, have you ever tried to transcribe all of your digital forms into a database where you could pull information from it, just to kind of get a quick measure of the room to see what's going on. You know, we've looked through all of the research papers that I've read so far from Verdantix and various other firms, Forrester and that. And one of the quotes that really resonated with me was from somebody from a chemical firm, an HSE director. And he says, to get started on their business intelligence project, they handed a consultant a huge volume of PDFs, which contained all of their incident data. And the costs on that project skyrocketed due to the pre-processing. And this was just the exploratory phase. And so they didn't make it very far, just simply because the budget was exhausted while they were entering all of the data into the database itself. So it's really, that's a big problem when it comes to actually launching a successful project, is monitoring those costs and making sure that we can do things effectively and get, for the lack of a better word, best bang for your buck, I suppose, in the sense of investment in equals investment out. All right, we're gonna let that poll get answered. And we'll move on. Yes and no. It's a 60-40 split. I'd be interested in chatting with the people who've tried it. I'd like to know, you know, some of the pains and successes, of course, as well, with how you ended up. All right, thanks for that, everyone. So enhancing analytics. The first step to any analytics project is to clean and normalize the data. And what that means is structuring it in such a way that it's repeatable across all the records that exist. And a record is for purposes of safety, would be a form submission, would be a single record. Whether your data is currently stored in a file cabinet, in spreadsheets, in PDFs, in a Google Doc, whatever, it's not likely to be indexed the same way for every single record. This information needs to be entered into a database that's structured for data consistency. And so once your data has been normalized or cleaned, it can be used in a meaningful way, even without AI. You'll be able to find that once data is formatted in a way that is consistent, we can use it for actual intelligence to gain insights into safety. We can then use that actual intelligence to locate the insights that you're going to need to use to create the business case and the return on investment case for a CFO or a finance exec. Once you've got some primary use cases and measurement metrics that you're going to be comparing against, it's much easier to gain that approval. So as I previously mentioned, the first step is always the hardest. So I recommend to just start with a digital data collection system for workers to start entering data directly into a database. That's going to start from a line in the sand with a digital database itself and clean data. Digital data collection automatically normalizes all that data already and starts you on the path of generating insights without any of the capital investment required to transcribe and normalize your existing historical records. We found that in as little as 4 weeks, safety managers, directors, coordinators are able to gain important information or insights around their safety programs. And there's this growing perception that EHS decision makers should really take a fresh look at the opportunity cost of continuing to operate the same way and expect better results than what they've received or delivered to date. And the way we perform safety and collect data needs a significant overhaul in order to enable AI to be effective. And so just making sure that we can effectively have all of our safety data structured in the same way so that when AI becomes available, we have a means to make it useful. So move on to the next slide. AI safety assistant tech. Now we've started, we had our first foray into what AI can really do from the term or the perspective of a safety manager. We've launched it internally in our own platform a few years ago, and we've been continuously developing and working on that. But let's talk about I'll get into that a little bit later, but I'll talk about what an AI assistant tech can do. And this is just based off of some of the discovery that we've done. So with the groundwork kind of covered off, let's talk about how it can benefit you directly. Combined with what I'd mentioned earlier, AI is great at gathering information and generating reports, which can highlight details that you're searching for. It's the perfect pattern recognition system, and to locate correlated statistics that naturally happen within your workforce itself for every single worker. And then it can make recommendations based on their usage. It'll even be able to take the wheel in some instances of control and reach out to your workers to touch base if a pattern's off track. And I'll jump into that a little bit later on. As I mentioned before, all of those paper forms that sit in your file cabinets would be forever to transcribe them all. Well, a properly trained AI assistant will eventually be able to take all of that data entry off of your plate. You supply it scans, and it can transcribe all of the details into the structured data sets that you're going to be creating already. And with AI, automation can take on a whole new dynamic. And when tasks start to happen on their own, like arranging training for your staff when their tickets are coming due, or auto-generating reports that are requested regularly, or picking up on an activity that seems repeatable, such as distributing documentation to somebody after a task is complete. As an example would be you're working for as a subcontractor to a general contractor, and every single hazard assessment that you submit needs to be submitted directly to the safety director or safety manager or coordinator on that site. The AI bot would be able to identify that and start to automatically complete it as a rule, so that you don't have to do that thought anymore. You don't have to do that task. It can get removed from your plate. The more data that we have clean and ready to feed the AI, the better it can perform. So imagine automating the prevention of incidents, taking factors such as weather, the amount of people at a site location, the amount of training gaps that exist within those individuals, the corrective actions that are either due or overdue, or past incidents that have happened on that site. An AI assistant will be able to determine the probability of an incident occurring and alert you, or at best, at worst, just to alert you, but it could also take steps to remedy the situation itself. Those steps might be something like closing out some of the corrective actions to reduce risk. So notifying a worker that these corrective actions are due, or prior to commencing work, fix that ladder kind of thing. Sending over information to those workers that happen to be on site. For example, if they're working in hot conditions and they just need a refresh on what steps are needed to take in order to do that, so it's all clear. An AI assistant would be able to automatically push that documentation out to your workforce to remind them, so complacency doesn't set in and you don't have any ill-prepared individuals on site. The point is, if you can think it, there's a way to gather the data for it. AI will be able to assist you in ways that you've never really imagined. So let's dive into a few of these examples and start talking about them in more detail. So gathering information and generating reports. I already mentioned how you'd be able to generate reports, but what would it actually look like using an AI assistant? Just like bringing in a human assistant and showing them what you need completed, you provide direction for the AI assistant. So the only difference is that you may need to follow a set of instructions or interactions that have been prioritized in order for it to recognize anything. And eventually, AI is going to get to a point of language understanding that we won't have to word things in a specific way, but for now, at the level that we're at today, it's slightly limited to what it can be done based on its training to recognize. So think of it like a toddler today learning how to speak and process instructions. So if you tell a toddler to do something, they may need to be told a couple times before they pick up on what that actually means. The first step is to ensure that when you make a request, like, for example, how many near miss reports were generated last month, it's capable of accessing that data. So the first step is making sure that it has and knows what that data looks like, where it exists, before we can even make the request itself. Second is it'll have to look through the data and send you a response. And so an example might be, there were 54 near-miss reports submitted in the last month. Or it may need further clarification, like, did you mean the past 30 days, or are you looking at the last calendar month or the current calendar month to date? Once it can clarify what you're looking for and it can set the parameters, it can automatically query your backend database. So once it's got you the answer, you can then ask that AI bot to send you an email of the report, of the summary of all those near-miss reports. And at that point, if you can imagine what I just went through with in a few moments, you just built a report on near-miss reporting with 3 lines of communication to an AI assistant. 1, how many near-miss reports were submitted? 2, for the past 30 days. 3, email me the summary. Now, we've effectively made that work within our own platform for the first 2 steps. We haven't done the report yet at this point in time, but we know that it can work. I know for some of you, this report can take hours or days to gather all the information, specifically with multiple locations and managers. If it's completed on paper and receiving a summary of the results of each near miss, well, that could take much more time. Having to scan through emails and phone calls, and I've even seen people have trips across the country in an effort to collect the information necessary to generate a monthly report. And I know that in 3 lines of communication, if we could gather all of that information, we would be exceptionally well off. Moving on from that, I kind of touched on some of the interactions that you have with a safety assistant. We'll just move on to the next slide. So there's going to be multiple ways that we can interact with an AI safety assistant. It's not going to be really any different than how we would interact with a human. So I alluded to those already, but so some of you might see where this slide's going. But when implementing new software, I just want to highlight some of the benefits to this. When implementing new software, there's usually issues of training people to use the software tools to whatever user interface that you're using. Sometimes it's not clear what needs to be clicked in order to get the results that you're looking for. And so with AI, you'll be able to interact with it just as if it was another person. You can text it, email it, or sometime in the not so distant future, you're going to be able to phone it or to call it and make complex requests that it'll be able to fulfill. So the access to this information is going to be in real time, and the instructions to get it will be grounded in common sense. It's going to be natural language. So if you're requesting something, it's going to have to make sense to you in order for it to be derived as a query from an AI bot itself. So this means you'll be able to take full advantage of digital tracking systems just in general without ever needing to log into those platforms themselves. And so using familiar apps like your text messaging and email system to reduce the time to learn so that it can start adding value in a much faster rate. I always imagine an AI assistant as a person sitting at a desk at the office, just kind of ready to navigate the software for you while you make requests for it. And above all else, if you're making a request to an assistant and it can't fulfill it, it'll be able to add this request to its training schedule and notify you when it can perform that action. And the best part is that it only has to do this once for each action that it can't perform. It can't forget how to do something because it's an algorithm. And so every training session that it runs will be a permanent change in the algorithm, making it even more useful over time. Imagine what it would be like after 1 month or 6 months or even a 1-year timeline, and extend that timeline out as far as you want. In the words of Elon Musk, any progression forward with an extended timeline will have the AI interacting with us as if it is a human and it doesn't ever forget things. So just to put some examples of what you could request from the AI bot that we had built a couple years ago. Monitoring workforce behavior has been something that a lot of companies have solved using human elements, positioning an actual person on site, just watching and collecting this information. And on the theme of imagining timelines, what this is going to look like. When an AI safety assistant begins analyzing workforce behavior, it won't be long before it's able to hold workers accountable. Even today, without AI, we find that having a date and time stamped safety form holds workers up to 85% more accountable to completing safety tasks on time, just simply trying to get them to do things on time. With an active AI safety assistant highlighting the places where present behavior is no longer reflective of the trends of the past. So for the past 3 weeks in a row, these workers have submitted their hazard assessments prior to starting work at 7 a.m. You know, this day here, 7 a.m. came and went and nothing has happened. It'll be able to take action on something like that. And it can then help them perform or correct the behavior and even jump them further. It can take that 85% and nudge it up to 99% is my thoughts. But just by simply putting a nudge out there or just notifying these workers to identify what's been going on. By holding workers accountable to safety, it becomes really easy to see where risk lies within your workforce. Workers that don't fill out documents on time ever are much more riskier than having them on site, but then all of the other individuals who perform safety voluntarily on regularly on time, and they recognize that it's for them. And so I see a future where each worker is generally going to have a risk profile associated to them, similar to the way general contractors handle subcontractors, where they need to do a risk profile before they can hire them. If a worker with a high risk profile, it may not work to have them working on a crew with similar individuals. You may need to blend them. And then the people who perform safety regularly can champion the individual who perhaps is a little bit late on a regular basis, depending on your tolerable risk of your organization as well and the jobs that you're performing. The point is, having a behavioral data set around safety performance will never know the answers to what AI can do for us until we start tracking this information. We need this data prior to an AI being able to generate any useful insights. And beyond that, AI is going to be able to analyze your data library from the safety form submissions and identify the forms that have answers that don't match the norm. So for example, you have 1,000 hazard assessments completed in your database, and 990 of them have answered yes to having the proper PPE on site, but 10 of them have answered no. It doesn't make sense to sift through all 1,000 to figure that out. Instead, let's treat the 10 as an anomaly and bubble them up to the top of your to-do list so that you can dig into those specific submissions and apply a remedy. Now amplify that across every single form template that you use and every single worker that you have submitting documentation into your safety profile or into your safety plan. Functions like these are prime examples of what AI can do when given the information that it needs. Then furthermore, working with paper. So as I was talking earlier, to transcribe documentation into a database is a huge administrative task and can usually overburden any capital project prior to even getting off the ground. And so once a digital system has been put into place, it becomes a much simpler task. It answers a few of the prerequisites before you even get going. Simply due to, you've already have a defined data structure now set by this digital system that you've put in place. So to match the historical paper or PDF documents to a digital structure in a database, it really lowers that hurdle. It makes it easier to overcome anyway. So then adding AI to the mix begins to automate it. So you may need to show the assistant where each piece of the form goes. So if you're mapping specifically how each answer on the document gets mapped to a digital indexed part of a form itself, you'll need to show it that a few times, but then once it has that, it can go through and start running through your digital records pretty easily to transcribe them into a database record. And once you have that AI assistant ready to recognize those forms from your historical records, you'll be able to actually apply that to real time as well. So if a worker, for whatever reason, drops their phone and it smashes and they have no devices to work with from a digital standpoint, they'd be able to fill out a paper document, and when they have time, snap a picture of it and send it to an AI safety assistant, which can then be transcribed into a data set as well. And that's how powerful AI is going to become in the future. And that should make your safety records far safer. Once you've gotten them out of file cabinets and backs of people's trucks and the desk they're piled up on right now, storing them in the cloud rather than those places makes it not only safer because it's in the cloud and it's reproducible, but it's also portable. And so you're able to do things with portable data much faster than you could before. And some of our clients, while they're not using AI specifically, they've been able to cross-reference their safety data to their HR information. For an example, they've been able to validate their timesheets submitted by their workers based on their safety documentation to make sure that everything lines up. And so once that data becomes portable, it becomes very powerful. So AI is it's going to be that powerful because it'll be able to do that automatically as you connect multiple peripheral systems together and start breaking down data silos themselves. And safety professionals are going to be using it pretty naturally moving into the future. And while the technology becomes or continues to be developed, we all have a role to play here. And that's the first step is to start collecting data in a structured way that scales as your workforce does. So we can't really be transcribing a bunch of stuff because that doesn't scale as workforces grow. That means digital data collection that stores information in a database and not PDFs is going to be the answer for that. When this step is completed, we can then use actual intelligence to start building our case for AI in the future. And what I mean is, look at the information yourself and identify the improvements that could be made to your safety program and then measure those improvements. Use this as the trial to what digital systems can do and then double down on AI to your executive team. Once it's rolled out and the business case can be made, it'll become a lot easier to get budget for larger analytics projects and data silo busting. So I guess what I'm really trying to say here is let's use real intelligence before doubling down on AI. We first need to help AI know what it needs to search for. While we have a bunch of hunches, that we may find a bunch of information from analytics projects that we can put into an actual algorithm itself that can scale to the entire workforce. So in conclusion, or to summarize, AI is the transformative trend, similar to what mobile apps look like and the web app trends of early 2010s. Safety analytics is nothing new, but it's really difficult to maintain. It's hard to continue dumping paper documentation or PDF documentation into a database itself for normalized data. The administrative burden is holding safety back. We're really not able to make any huge leaps and bounds until we solve that problem. And small steps to advance AI internally is what's going to really help with an AI project or deploying AI successfully in the future. And the first step is to start with clean data and actual intelligence. I really want to, sorry, my cat's meowing. Start with clean data and actual intelligence. Don't make the leap into an AI system without having a whole bunch of other answers solved first. And I can see we have a bunch of questions. So with that summary, I'm going to look at quickly answering these. I think we have a few minutes here. Come on. So I hope we can address what I call Whack-A-Mole Safety culture, where safety consultants are dispatched to put fires. Safety has been firefighting in a lot of cases. They haven't had the ability to foresee anything, so therefore they're responding to OH&S or to, OSHA inspections, or they're responding to incidents because nothing's happening. And so I think the worker accountability portion of this is where a lot of this happens, where traditionally safety's been viewed as one person's responsibility when really it's everyone's responsibility, and that really hasn't trickled down through the industry yet. I think it's coming. People are getting wise to it. I think COVID-19 really put that on the map, in the sense that if you caught COVID-19 at work, you could take that home with you and hurt your family and hurt your loved ones. And that really put it home as far as the health and safety is concerned within the workers themselves, because nobody really wants to get hurt at work. But when it's yourself, you can justify it. But if you're hurting your family, it's a little bigger story. But I think AI is going to detect those patterns that I was talking about earlier, about behavioral issues, and hold workers accountable to safety, so that it's not coming from an enforcement standpoint. It's coming from an app, an algorithm nudging people, and it's easy to accept that feedback easier than it is from an officer or an enforcement mechanism coming down on them, telling them that they failed and that they need to fix it. It's going to be more of a, hey, you normally do this, you haven't done it yet, let's get it done. So I hope that that's going to be what the WhackaMole safety, the end of the WhackaMole safety culture. Can AI flag absence of reports, example, near miss against predictions based on reported incidents? Absolutely. That's one thing that AI is going to really be able to do is look at that past behavior to find out, okay, what trend lines are we looking at that happened and what should the future look like? And if we're not meeting the trend of what we have done in the past, then there can be flags made and created and analyzed around what's next, like who needs to be submitting documentation into this platform. And then really cool thing about analyzing future behavior based on past records is that if you implement an incentive for near miss reporting, you're going to be able to step up that bar and say, look, we've been doing 5 near miss reports for the past 5 weeks, every single week. We need to now do 15. And you can start to create that incentive and adjust those behavior patterns that the AI looks at without actually having to go in and change set points, just by creating new incentives. And of course, if somebody is reporting a weekly near miss and all of a sudden one is missed, it can certainly remind those individuals to submit something into your database itself. If another question here, if thousands of records of historical data exist in paper version, still require scanning prior to an AI bot auto-filling and allocating to correct safety assignment and processing, is there any way around this step? As it's a huge, large cost sink for any project, and I totally understand. That's what I was alluding to about, starting with lowest cost or lowest hurdles first. So let's leave the locked data where it is and just start collecting from now moving forward digital data so that you can start to derive intelligence around what's happening today from a digital standpoint, and then making the case to say, yes, now I'll be able to go in because I've affected the workforce in a positive way. Now I'll be able to justify a historical or a legacy data project using the new transformations that you've made within your workforce. I think that's the big thing, is that we were really trying to take away the fact that don't let the historical records stop you from starting with clean data today. Another question, how can more complex, example, visual input records, photographs, examples, or videos be integrated and processed in an AI system? This is that OCR technology, that optical character recognition system. I'm seeing what I'm thinking of seeing here, or in the trends not too far off, is our sign-off system, for example. It right now is a username, password, or a scribble on a signature. We're going to be rolling out QR codes here pretty quickly, but I'm seeing that at the end of a safety meeting, you take a snapshot of the group of individuals who took place or who attended that meeting, and with facial recognition, we can use that as proof that they existed at that time. And I think that's going to be a huge benefit. What we're also working on is that incident reports are no longer going to be reports that people sit there and type on in order to add their context. It's going to be just picture, circle where the incidents occurred, and then we're going to feed that into an AI system that will start to unravel what incidents look like, so that in the future, in the next 5 years, we'll be able to just take a picture of site and have it identify where an incident may occur. That's where I'm seeing the process going. And then you can tie that into real-time feeds like CCTV cameras, where you'll be able to actually have some sort of meaningful live feed of something happening, where get rid of any leading indicators of an incident that may occur. And last one here, looks like, how can we integrate these new management ideas such as lean? I think optimizing any business process is really in line with lean at this point in time. So for example, replacing legacy paperwork systems, I think, and creating accountability within your workforce is just a key to unlocking a lean operation. Removing waste is really what we're all about, and what lean is really trying to accomplish. And so if you don't have to have people sitting there entering data into an Access database or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever dashboarding system you choose to use, and have that feed automatically so that you get real-time analytics. I mean, that's what Salesforce did for sales. Before that, we had these CRMs that were always a month behind, and sales forecasts that were always done on Excel and had to be reported up to the executive team. Well, nowadays they can just log in and take a look at it because it's that efficient at predicting what a sales pipeline is going to look like. And so I think that if we take the concepts that Salesforce generated for sales processes and apply that to safety, we can get the same thing, where safety managers don't have to call and collect information from various stakeholders within the organization. They're just going to be able to look at a dashboard and say, oh yeah, I see that here's the 5 things that I asked are completed, and now here's the 2 anomalies that I got to investigate. And it really is going to help with prioritizing a safety manager's day, a safety director's day, safety coordinator, whatever level of safety you happen to be. It's really going to be applied so that you can go in, get your to-do list for the day, and as long as you've checked off all of those pieces of checkboxes, you'll have done the most amount of risk reduction based on your time. It would have been the best investment of your time, solving those top 10 things, rather than kind of running around or responding to phone calls on a regular basis. So that's how I see this coming out in the future. But all right, I think that answers all the questions. If there are more, feel free to send an email over. Let me know personally, what you're looking for, or if I didn't answer anything specifically. Always open for having more conversations. I love talking about AI and technology just in general. So feel free to kick us over any communications with respect to that. After this is all done, you're all going to get a copy of the slide deck and in an email shortly, and as well as a link to this video here. So if you ever want, if there's something that I happen to say that you'd like to repeat or to share, feel free to do so. And without anything further, I appreciate everyone staying online with us while we talked, and I hope you all gain some sort of value out of it. Stay safe, everyone.